back out, and they are the restoration prophets, and they are trying to restore Jerusalem and the temple and God's religion exactly the way it was before they went into captivity. So tonight, we are with Nehemiah. Now, last week, we also had Nehemiah. As we studied him, we got down to the tactics of the enemy here. And that's where we begin tonight in studying him to see what really it is all about. So now then, what are the tactics of the enemy then that we have in Nehemiah? Last week, we studied the first 3 chapters. I'm not going to be going back and talking about that other than to say that we paralleled what Nehemiah was doing with what we're trying to do. Nehemiah and Ezra and Zerubbabel were trying to restore the city of Jerusalem, physical Mount Zion, the way it was before. We're trying to restore spiritual Mount Zion so that we will have a church exactly the way it was before it was destroyed back in the Dark Ages and mutilated at that period of time. Now, Nehemiah comes over and he gets all the people together and they start to work. As they started to work, they are really beginning to make some progress. And it's going to be interesting tonight as we see now the tactics that the enemy used. How the enemy came in and how they tried to destroy the work, keep Nehemiah from doing the job by using several different tactics. Now we can learn from this because human nature never changes. Nehemiah would be building a wall. We're trying to work here in the church. But it's all human beings, and human beings never change. And so you're going to see that what those people did is what people really try to do today. And we'll get answers to how we should respond really to this. Now, as we start out in chapter 4, here we find that the enemy began to make fun of him. Now, there's 2 guys in here that we're talking about, Sanballat and Tobiah, and they are the enemies, and they do not want this city rebuilt. So as you start out up here, it says, it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that they were building the wall, he was wroth. He really got angry. He really got mad. He didn't want this to happen, and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. So now he's going to mock them, and he's going to make fun of them. What do you feel like doing when somebody mocks you and somebody makes fun of you? All right, you want to retaliate, but why do you want to retaliate? What happens before that? You get angry. Why do you get angry? What happens before that? What's that? It hurts your feelings. That's right. When somebody mocks you, it hurts your feelings. They're making fun of you. And when they make fun of you, what they're saying, anytime anybody makes fun of you, is that you're weaker. You're weaker than I am. You're just you don't know what you're doing. You're nothing but a little baby, and putting you underneath them. And the first thing it does is it hurts your feelings. Now you do go through these other stages in here of becoming upset or angry, and feeling like retaliating and so forth. But we hold those things back. And we have to handle it as adults. What would happen if every time somebody made fun of you, you just hauled off and hit them in the mouth and got to do what you wanted to do? Yeah, they wouldn't make fun of you anymore, would they? In front of your face. It'd be behind your back. Hey, there goes old Mitch over there. There goes, and be walking behind Mitch all the time, and then Mitch turned around, I'd go like this, But everybody would be making fun of you. So you have to handle it like an adult. Well, let's see here now what they said. They come down, and they said in verse 3, Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Why, even that which they are building, if a fox were up, he'd break down their stone wall. Remember those stone walls that they're building? How big and powerful even the smallest stone wall would be. So they're making fun of it. Well, look at that little old thing he's built. If a fox jumped up on it, it would fall down, making fun of it, hurting your feelings, and an immature person would quit. Well, I'm just not going to do anything if they're going to hurt my feelings. Now, in verse 4, Nehemiah said, Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn back their reproach upon their own head, and give them up for a spoil in a land of captivity. So they turn to God and ask Him to take care of it. Lord, we are despised. We are mocked. We're being made fun of. Would you please take care of it? Now, when you get over to the New Testament, Romans the 12th chapter really tells us the same thing in here. What does he tell us about vengeance? By the way, what is vengeance? What does it mean? Justice. It means paying back, giving somebody what they deserve. That's justice, isn't it? But what does God say about you doing that when somebody does something to you? Vengeance or justice. Paying back belongs unto me, God said. He said, I will take care of that, and I will see that they get what they deserve. So don't you try to pay back. What happens when you try to pay back? It's not very fair. From being a little boy all the way up, when somebody hits you, you're going to pay them back. But how did you pay them back? They hit you once, you hit them twice. And the second one is just for good measure. Remember? Pete, this is just for good measure. Everything's fine now. But the other person then, they're going to do that. So from little children all the way up, we do not know how to take vengeance or justice in our own hands. We always go overboard. So he then calls upon God. Oh, Lord, look at this. Now let me ask you, as we preach the gospel of Christ today, we go out and we tell people, now here's the Bible, here's what God says, we're following the Bible, and there is but one church, there is but one way. Do people despise us? Do people say ugly things? Why, of course they're going to. And they're going to hurt your feelings. But just understand, Nehemiah didn't let it get him down, and we need to turn it over to God, and don't let those things get us down either. All right. He said he went ahead and they worked, down there in verse 6, for the people had a mind to work. Now, in verse 8 of the same chapter, we come down, and it says, the enemies then came in, and they conspired, all of them together, to come and fight against Jerusalem, and to cause confusion therein. Now, what they were wanting to do was fight against Jerusalem, and if they couldn't win, if it was a battle that you couldn't win, at least you could cause a lot of confusion, couldn't you? And you could stop the work. You might not be able to be strong enough to conquer, but you can sure cause a lot of confusion in the work. And so they came and they tried to do that. He says, but we made our prayer unto our God, and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of the burdens is decayed, and there's much rubbish, and so that we're not able to build the wall. And our adversary says that they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst of them and slay them, and cause the work to cease. In other words, they keep telling us, we're not going to give up. We're going to just keep pecking at you. We're just going to keep doing this until you stop that work. We're just going to keep at you, just keep at you, just keep at you, you see, until we stop that work. How is that when somebody is irritating you, they're fighting you? It's really not a big fight, but it's the constant picking on, you see. Does it cause any confusion? How many marriages have been broken up by this very act right here, you see? And churches destroyed and so forth by this very thing. All right. Now then, the next thing that happened is in verse 12. And it came to pass that when the Jews that dwelt by them came, now that would be the Jews who were not living in Jerusalem. There were Jews at this time that had scattered out throughout the country there, as we'll see a little bit later on. They came and they said unto us 10 times from all places, you must return unto us. Now then, here we have some of the brethren giving up. Instead of the brethren out there coming and saying, we really appreciate the battle you're in. We really appreciate what you're doing. We really appreciate you building up Jerusalem. They come, and what do they encourage them to do? Give up the fight. Why don't you just come on out and live with us, and Why stay in here and be so narrow-minded and determined to do this one thing? Because it makes everybody mad. Everybody in the country is mad at the Jews because of you people here in Jerusalem of what you're doing. And so, can brethren then get on you and say things about you and tear down the work by trying to get you to stop? You see, when you do these good things. So, I did that. Now, we're coming on down in verse 14. It said, "And I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, Be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses." So Nehemiah said, I looked around and I told him, don't you be afraid. Now we've got all these enemies round about us. Even our brethren are trying to discourage us and get us to stop. But don't be afraid. Keep on doing what you are doing. It's in here. Now, verse 15, "It came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall." Now, this is interesting. When Nehemiah had given these solutions, he comes up then and he says, now, God has brought their counsel to nothing. In other words, we see here that in the process that we've taken, in what we've done, we haven't given up. When they come and they try a tactic, we then turn to God and we continue to work, and God has caused them, their plans, their counsels to all fail. Then he says this, because of all these plans, because of all these things that these people out there are doing, he knows that they're sitting out there and they're ready to make an attack at any time. So Nehemiah says, we now have to make some plans. So he said here in verse 16, "It came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and half of them held the spears and the shields and the bows and the coat of mail, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. And they that builded the walls and they that bare burdens laded themselves, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other held he his weapon. And the builders, every one, had his sword girded by his side, and so builded." Now, let's try to get the picture. You remember last week that we've got this big wall? And how are they building this wall? Are they building it all at once, or are they taking a section at a time? How are they doing this? Okay, it's being built all at the same time, but different families are taking sections to do it. In other words, here's my section, so I'm working on this. You got a section on over there, but we're building it up all the way around this so that it'll all be finished at the same time. Now then, as you're building it, you're spread out. And the enemy's out there, and they can attack. And they're going to be attacking, when they do attack, one section of the wall, aren't they? And here it is, just a few people over here on this section of the wall. So what Nehemiah said, he said, now from here on, here's what we're going to do. We're going to divide up the people. We're going to have half of them working, and half of them back here bearing the arms and bringing things and watching out and getting ready for the battle. And now then, everybody that is working, you put your sword in one hand and you work with the other hand. Now, when you look at those big rocks, I expect that what Nehemiah is trying to say right here is you don't carry your sword in one hand and pick up those big rocks in your left hand and put them up there. You see, like this. Well, what would he mean? You have your sword in one hand and you work with the other hand. Always have that sword right there with you, see, so that it's right there in your grasp at all times. So you get out there and you work, and you're always prepared. Now, would it be better to build a wall with a sword strapped on you somehow in here, or without any encumbrance of a sword. But you put that sword on, you have it right there, and you have it ready to go. So everybody now is ready to fight at any minute. So as they're out there building, they're watching, they've got their weapon, they're ready to fight at any moment. Now in verse 18, the last part, and he that soundeth the trumpet was by me. Nehemiah said, now I will have the trumpet bearer where I am, so that I will give the orders. And he said, and I said unto the nobles, unto the rulers, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we're separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place soever you hear the sound of the trumpet, resort you thither unto us, and our God will fight for us. So Nehemiah now has the system built up there, so that all these people are watching. And when an army sneaks up and tries to break in this section, he then has the trumpet bearer to be over there where it is and blow the trumpet, keep blowing it. Everybody heads for the trumpet, sound of the trumpet, when the trumpet blows. So these people then trying to come in here, the whole army will just go over there and knock them off. And then everybody goes back to building the wall. Then they try to break in over there, everybody goes over there. And then come back and build the wall. Now, the same thing is true, really, in the church. As we are preaching the gospel and trying to establish the church the way that it is in the New Testament period of time, people are going to attack. Now, they're not going to do it with a physical sword. Paul said our weapons are not carnal weapons. In other words, we don't use shotguns and swords. But we have the Word of God and the very thoughts of our hearts. And so that's the battle that we're fighting. Now, when somebody comes along and they attack the church, they're going to do it with some false doctrine. 30 years ago, let's go back at the beginning of the century. Back at the beginning of the century, or if you want to, going back to 1849, in the Restoration Movement, the first big problem. Here it is that Alexander Campbell and some of his friends, they built up a human organization to preach the gospel. And he was the president, and then they wanted all churches to send to this human organization. Now suppose that I started me an organization here, and I pick out Lee and Cal and Steve and make them officers in this organization. And then we ask all the churches to send money to us so we then can send preachers throughout the world. Now, is that found in the New Testament? No. There's elders over every church. Now then, all of a sudden, we've got this. And what would happen if all the churches did that? Let's suppose all the churches said, okay, those three men want the money. Let's just send them the money we've got. And then they can send the preachers out throughout the world. Who really do we have over the entire church in the preaching realm? That's three guys. We're getting pretty close to getting up there and working kind of as a pope now, aren't we? You see, when we do this? All right. In 1849, when Campbell did that, guess what people did? The faithful conservative people, guess what they did? What's that? Went back to that book. And they said, okay. And they picked up that book. Now, they'd been out preaching to the world. They'd been out preaching, and they were converting people so rapidly that they thought in their lifetime they would convert every person on the face of the earth. That's how fast they were converting. Campbell started this. All of a sudden, they quit their preaching. The trumpet sounded, so speakingly. They all ran and began to fight what battle? Now, in Nehemiah's day, if I'm building this section of the wall and the enemy comes up here, where does the whole army come to fight? Here, wherever the trumpet is. All right, now then, we've got a human organization going to do the work of the church. Where does everybody rush to? What is the battle? What do they fight over? That's what they fight over. Okay, they fought over that. Then later on, down at the beginning of the century, they had a doctrine, premillennialism, that we'll be studying Sunday night. And it crept into the church. And so all of a sudden, here it is, people starting to preach premillennialism. Guess what the brethren did? They left this human organization stuff. They rushed over, and what were sermons preached on? Premillennialism. So just constantly, premillennialism. Finally got that thing whipped out. Then you go on up into the 30s and 40s and so forth. Then you get into human organizations to do benevolent work. And one church over another. And then everybody starts preaching on that. That's where I came on the scene, in the early 50s, 1952. And this was it. And in those days, that's all you heard. Every time you go to church, people were preaching on institutionalism, is what it's called. Setting up institutions to do the work of the church. Just constantly. You get so sick of it, that's all you'd hear. Invite a person to come in and hold a meeting, guess what he'd preach on? Every sermon, he'd work it in. Preaching on that. Why did people preach on that until you got sick of it? That was creeping in to destroy the church. You're going to destroy the church. Finally, the visions came, and that gets out, and then there'll be new things coming. Right now, we're in a kind of a pretty peaceful situation as far as attack on the church is concerned. But there'll be another one. It'll probably be women teachers and turning into women preachers and women elders. That is coming, see, in the church. What's that? You're already hearing about it. There are already churches that are doing it. And it's starting like this. And so it is coming, you see, in. Now, what will happen when all of a sudden, Steve and I get up Sunday morning and tell you that we've appointed 2 more elders. We appointed our wives as elders. They're both smarter than we are, and we decided that. Well, his is smarter than he is. And so we decided that, and so we appointed them elders. What's going to happen? Going to be any controversy? What? Okay, you try it, buddy. See whether you're big enough or not. I mean, there's going to be a fight, isn't there? See, there's going to be a fight. And I said, no, this is the way it is. Well, what's your attitude? That's not the way it is. See? In other words, we're going to have a battle, aren't we? Now, suppose that I tell you, look, you people out there, all I ever hear is you complaining about us appointing our wives as elders. Why don't you talk about something else? I get sick and tired of you talking about that. Talk about something else. What would you say? Now, that's the issue now. That's the thing that will destroy the church. That's where the trumpet is, you see. And we're not going to let go of that battle until it is whipped out of here, see. And so you have to fight the battle wherever the battle is there. So whatever the issue is that comes up, then that's the battle that really has to be fought. That's what he was doing here in a physical way, and we can see it there. All right. Then we come on down in the next one over here in chapter 4, verse 15. Well, we got that right there. Caused them to prepare for war. Already talked about that. Now, in chapter 5, 1 through 13, here is a situation of where greed crept in among these people. Now, put yourself in the shoes of these people. They've all been over in Babylonian captivity, have they not? And they come back, and as they're over here, they're trying now to rebuild, and they don't have anything. They're starting from scratch, aren't they? They're starting from scratch. So they're starting to rebuild. Now, anytime that you start to rebuild, there's going to be some people that have more money sense than other people. There's going to be people that can make money, and then they're going to loan me their money because I don't know how to make money. Now, when people loan me their money, what do? They charge interest, don't they? And so here it is that you had a lot of people that didn't have any houses. You had other people that was over there that had made their business deals, and they'd made some money. And so they then began to loan money to the poor brethren. As they loan money to the poor brethren, let's suppose that there's 6 men in this congregation that has a lot of money. And so anybody here that wants to build a house, you didn't have banks to go to, you go to one of these 6 brethren. Yeah, I'll loan you the money, and it's a mortgage, and charge you interest. Now, what kind of interest can you charge when the supply is really low? See, whatever you want, people are going to start paying for it. So yeah, so I charge you big interest. Now, as you become more indebted to me, you can't pay it off. You just keep getting farther in debt, don't you? You see, all the time, and it ends up us 6 guys. We pretty well own you. Now, how would you feel? We're all fighting the same battle, and 6 people in here are getting rich while you're getting poor by the day as you fight your battle. See, that's kind of discouraging, isn't it? All right, that's what happened. There were some of these people that made this money, and so they mortgaged it out, and so the people came to Nehemiah, the poor people, and they said, in verse 3, in verse 2, for there were that said, we, our sons and daughters are many, let us get grain that we may eat and live. Some also said, that were there said, we are mortgaging our fields and our vineyards and our houses. Let us get grain because of the drought. In order to eat, we have to borrow money. There were also said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute upon our fields and our vineyards. We have to borrow money to pay taxes, you see, off of people here. So they were having to borrow it. Now, verse 5. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as our children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. So what I'm doing, just in order to feed the family, I have to borrow money. To borrow money, I'm going farther and farther in debt. The only way that I can pay for this is with my children, to sell them as slaves, let them go work for these people out here, and there's nothing I can do about it. I either let my kids starve, or I end up selling them as slaves. And it's all to my brethren. Now, all of us who are here, we're all fighting the same battle, and yet here's 6 guys who's ending up owning all the property and owning all the people. How would you feel fighting out there to try to defend that kind of a situation? So they came to Nehemiah and they complained. Nehemiah got the people together. Verse 6, he said, and I was very angry when I heard their crying these words. Then I consulted with myself and contended with the nobles and the rulers and said unto them, ye exact usury, every one of his brethren. What does that mean, you exact usury? What is usury? Unfair interest. Too high of interest. And so you are charging these people much more interest than what is reasonable to charge them. And so then he tells them, now, give these people back their fields. Give these people back their sons and their daughters. You give these people, you put their money back. You give it back to them. You bring this playing field back down. We're all in a battle. Our battle in here is to try to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and not to make you few people rich. And so he shamed them, and they said, we will restore it all. We're sorry. We'll do it. And so they went ahead, and they did it. So he got over that. So here it is. He faced the greed then, just head on in doing that. Now, as we go on down, let's go to verse 6. Now it came to pass when it was reported to Sanballat and to Tobiah, those are the two enemies, to Geshem the Arabian, and unto the rest of our enemies, that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though even unto that time I had not set up the doors of the gates. Now when the enemies understood we had rebuilt the walls, except we hadn't set up the gates. No, they were there protecting the gates with themselves, see? So we hadn't set up the gates, but we had rebuilt the walls. Now, when they heard that, then they knew that they couldn't get in to whip us. Said, here's what they said, verse 2. Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in one of the villages of the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. So what they did was, they offered to negotiate. I tell you what, Nehemiah, why don't you come down here? We'll meet you down here in the plain called Ono. We'll meet you down here and we'll talk about this. We'll negotiate. We'll be able to make some compromises in this thing. We haven't been able to make fun of you and get you to quit. We haven't been able to cause confusion among you and get you to quit. Your brethren have failed. The greedy people among you, you've caught them. You've got that problem solved. Let's sit down and talk about this. Let's negotiate. Do you suppose that the religious world wants to negotiate with us today? In other words, yeah, if you people down there, if you will quit preaching on baptism, especially, you quit preaching that you have to be baptized, and you quit preaching that there is but one church, we'll get along just fine. I mean, we will accept you as our brethren, and we want you to come. And sure, and that's what they do. And I get invitations all the time. Come to these denominational preachers' meetings, the Ministerial Alliance, and let's all work together. And let's have our prayer meetings together. Let's get together and let's do this. Now, if we do that, we say, well, okay, we don't want any hard feelings in town about people thinking that we might be narrow-minded and preaching baptism for remission of sin, so we'll give on that point a little bit. We'll give on, the one church, thinking that and so forth. We give up, we can have unity. They'll put their arms around us. They'll love us. They'll come and preach here. I can go preach there. It's a constant thing of them wanting to do it. But what have we done if we do that? We've compromised. And what's wrong with compromising? Okay, we've given up God's word, haven't we? We've given it up, and we said, okay, we will build this other than the way God wants it built. Now, here's what his attitude was. He said they thought to do me mischief. It was not an honest thing. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? Isn't that a pretty good answer? I am doing a great work. I'm doing the Lord's work. I'm rebuilding the wall and the city that the Lord wants rebuilt. I'm doing a great work. Why should I leave this great work that I'm doing and come down and talk with you? I mean, what sense does that make? When I leave it, this work will cease, and then we'll have a work of compromise. And so what he said, no, I will not compromise. See? There'll be no compromising made after this. And they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. In other words, every time I'd answer them the same manner. Then, the next thing that we see then that they're going to do is Sanballat comes up to him, here in verse 6, and he said, It is reported among the nations, everybody around, they hear this, that thou or you and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou art building the wall. Now, what you guys are wanting to do, you're building the walls of Jerusalem so you can rebel again. By the way, who was over the Jews at this time? What other country? Who ruled the world? The Persians ruled the world at this time. But the Persians had let the Jews go back to rebuild the city, hadn't they? Now, we hear that what you're going to do is you're getting ready to rebel against the Persians. And we're going to go tell on you. See? So that's what we're going to do. You build up these walls so that you can rebel against the Persians, so we're going to go tell on you. He said, for which cause you built these walls, that thou wouldest be, and you want to be their king. We've heard Nehemiah, you plan on being the king of the Jews. As soon as you get the wall built, you're going to become king. You'll rebel against the Persians. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem. You also now have some prophets here preaching and saying that you're the king of Judah. Well, how many of these things are true? None of them are true. Absolutely none of them are true, see. Saying there's a king in Judah, and now it shall be reported to the king according to these words. In other words, we're going to go tell the Persian king what's happening. That you have appointed yourself as king. You have set up the prophets that have convinced the people that you're a king. You've rebuilt the wall so that you can rebel against them. Well, what have we got here? Just one pack of lies against the other, don't we? So lying and threatening government intervention, threatening them, here's what we're going to do. Well, here's Nehemiah's report. Well, these people said, come therefore and let us take counsel together. In other words, let's come and talk this thing over, see. Trying to get him to do it, lying about him to try to get him to come and talk. Then I said unto him, saying, there is no such thing done as you say, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. You've made them all up out of your own mind. Nothing like that has taken place. It said, for they would all have made us afraid, saying, their hands shall be weakened from the work that is not done. But now, O God, strengthen thou thy hands. So, Nehemiah would not succumb to this. Then, we got another one down here in verse 10, where they tempt Nehemiah to sin. So what he does, as you read this, is that this enemy comes in, and he acts like he's a friend of Nehemiah's. And so he comes to Jerusalem. He gets inside Jerusalem. He's in there, and he says, Nehemiah, the enemy's coming. The enemy's coming, and they're going to kill you. Let's hide you. Let's make sure we shut you up so that they can't kill you. Step in here in the temple. Let's step in here in the temple, and we'll hide you. Can Nehemiah go in that temple? No. He can't go in that temple. Only the priests can go in the temple. And so they wanted to get him in there so they could hold that against him and show that he was sinning. And he did it planning or feigning that I'm doing it to save your life. We need to get you out of here and shut you up in here. So in the last part of verse 10, it said, they'll come and slay thee. They in the night, they're going to come and slay thee. And then Nehemiah said, and I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that being such as I would go into the temple to save his life? I'll not go in. In other words, I wouldn't go in that temple if it saved my life, because I'm going to obey what God said. He said, and I discerned, and lo, God had not sent him. I understood that God had not sent him, like he said. But he pronounced a prophecy against me, and Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. And for this cause he was hired, that I should be afraid and do so and sin, and that they might have a matter for an evil report, that they might reproach me. And then he says, remember me, O God, for good, and remember them in the evil thing that they have done there. So then in verse 16, verse 16. No, verse 15. So the wall was finished in the 25th day of this month, 52 days. So by working constantly, not giving in, not compromising, they built the wall in 52 days. And it came to pass when all our enemies heard thereof, that all the nations that were about us feared, and were much cast down in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was wrought of our God. How many times do you find that God uses His people to show that there is a God in heaven? As you go back to calling Moses to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt, and as He brought them out of Egypt, God could have done that a lot more efficiently than He did, couldn't He? And by that I mean, did God have to go through those 10 plagues? Did God have the power to just send Moses down and say, go get them and walk out? And if they chase you, He had that power, didn't He? You know why He did those 10 plagues? Down at the end, He tells us over and over and over again why He did those 10 plagues. To show the world He's the one and only God. What do you think happened to the world round about when Moses would do a plague and the Pharaoh would buckle under? That would have been big news. Then the Pharaoh comes back and said, I'll not let you go. And then he says, I'll turn every drop of water in this nation into blood. And he did. Would that make news? Every river, every bucket, every jar, every sink was turned into blood? That would make news, wouldn't it? 10 of them. And when He walked out of there, all the nations were afraid of the God of Israel. He was made known through them. Right here is another occasion. Various occasions it is this way. But it's made known that these people around there, they saw that here comes in these helpless little slaves, people that have been in prison for 70 years, don't own anything. This wine bearer who doesn't know anything about building a wall, and he comes down here, and in 52 days, he rebuilds that wall. I bet you that if you gave that out to a contractor today, we might try that with Dave Willie back there, see if he can build a wall in 52 days that looks like that one we've got up there. Great big 20-foot wall with great big rocks in it, even with heavy machinery. I mean, building a wall in 52 days is really something when the enemies are trying to get at you at all times. So when it was done, everybody stood back and they said, this must be the work of God. Must be the work of God. All right. As we go ahead then in chapter 7, I want you to look and see where the next one's going to come up there, chapter 13. See when we skip over there? No, up here on the chart, Lee. Up here on the chart in chapter 13, 1, that's going to be the next one that we're talking about. Okay, what happens between 7 and 13? All right, in chapter 7, and it came to pass that when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors and the porters and all of these things, and I was setting up the gates and so forth, that we come down here in verse 5, and my God put into my heart together with the nobles and the rulers of the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found the book of genealogy of them that came up at the first, and I found written therein. Now, were genealogies important to the Jews? Very definitely. Why were they so important? What two tribes do you have to have? Levi and Judah. Because the king's going to come out of Judah, and the priest has got to function from Levi. So they need the genealogy. So let's make sure we're doing this thing right. So they go find the book of genealogy. Now, as you read, you can just look down through there. all the way through chapter 7, it gives you the genealogies of different tribes. So we're not going to read that. In chapter 8, it gives you the genealogies of different tribes. So we're not going to read that. That's not important, really, for us to get in the genealogies. Now, in chapter 8, by the way, well, let's see, chapter 8 is not a genealogy that we'll get at. It's something else. It's going to be a real important thing. Right there is where we're going to quit tonight, is in chapter 8. And it's a real important thing that they're getting ready to do. Now, we won't get back on these things here again until chapter 13. So next week, we'll finish the book of Nehemiah and get back on some other things that they tried then to destroy his work there. Okay, class dismissed.